beside it, and some other, typical regime changes, etc. before that, and some of the information, because it was complex when it was coming out. But I never myself questioned kind of like, that there was a resistance. Art said he had some acquaintances. I have friends that I worked with from Syria and a bunch of family over there, and they said, yeah, there was a large breakaway from the army that was fighting Assad and were protecting homes, and it wasn't overrun by Islamists at first. So there were, and Louis Proyect goes into the kind of economic and neoliberal reforms made in the country that, started making the situation worse, because this uprising was kind of got a little bit of, a little bit different than the other uprisings that swept across, you know, northern Africa at the time
Well,
during the Arab Spring.
well, right. Like, well, the Arab Spring began in Tunisia, right?
Yeah.
And then it spread into Egypt, and shortly after it spread into Egypt, it hit Libya and Algeria about the same time, I think, and it also hit, I think it's Bahrain,
Yeah.
And it began to hit Iraq, and Syria was like the last country it hit, like in this big wave of uprisings. Like it hit Saudi Arabia before Syria. Like there was protests in Saudi Arabia. They got crushed like
Oh
instantly.
yeah.
Like I think there was a Shiite imam that was helping to lead those protests. He was beheaded. Um,
Yeah.
and uh, so anyway, like, uh, so it was. I think it was like right around the time that like the conflict in Libya was like reaching a peak, and that's when things started to really heat up in Syria. Like, with the protests started really getting bigger in Syria, I think around that time, and the reason I remember is because I was in a concrete class when the Libyan uprising happened, and and I had a classmate who is Libyan, and his brother was fighting against Gaddafi, and so basically every day the class would ask him. There were several people from the Middle East in my class, like Palestinian and Egyptian and whatnot, and they'd basically ask him, "Hey, how's your family and your brother doing?" Because he always looked stressed, and rightfully so, because there was a civil war going on in Libya,
Yeah.
and there was an uprising, and for a while there was like, I mean, eventually there was a no-fly zone in Libya, right? But at first there wasn't a no-fly zone, so Gaddafi was able to basically bomb anybody that was in his way. So right around the time that it started heating up in Syria, I mean, that was fairly, I think it started out fairly democratic, and it was very easy to support. Like the initial protesters got machine gunned down, right? And
Yeah.
that's when things began to get a little bit like there began to be armed resistance. Like basically the protesters started picking up weapons, and sections of the Syrian army was breaking off and saying that it would support the protesters.
Yeah.
And that's
And
when the FSA developed, right? And
yeah, and I mean, I was supportive of that too, until, yeah, I mean, until, because a problem with this article too, I think, is it doesn't talk enough about this too, is the situation in Iraq beside it, which blurred, kind of blurred the vision here, or like, because it was extremely complex at first, and I got some things wrong. And, for example, I mean, there were major chemical attacks in Iraq, and they were all caused by ISIL from 2013 to 2017. So I
Right.
mean, I mean, I think a lot of people kind of, and then when ISIL started pouring in to Syria, and I mean, that kind of clouded people's judgment. And I think, I think that needs to be talked about if we're going to get anywhere with like clearing the air with some of these people,
Right.
because
ISIL was like the predecessor organization to ISIS,
yeah,
right? I mean, if I remember right. And then that kind of also grew out of kind of a mixture of like hardcore like jihadists and ex military
yeah,
from Saddam's army.
yeah. And I think it's important to clear up too is that people, for a while there was like, from everywhere was saying how big ISIS was in Syria, and then, just trying to make everybody into these extremists as opposed to separating like rebels. And I mean, war's complicated and it's dirty. And
Sure.
I mean, just because people are fighting guerrilla warfare doesn't make them extremists either. I mean, it's so I mean, you get that lumping in of everything together. I mean, because yeah, it started to get extremely complex. And one thing that I don't like here too, I mean, he kind of goes on, he gets a little muddy here. Well, one thing, okay, scroll down to where it says keeping in mind that Saudis always had more to fear. Like sometimes I mean, I'm kind of unclear what, I mean, because Proyect's kind of got that like edgy, like kind of like rhetorical, made in jest comments. Like,
Sure.
what does he mean here? On March, he's like the Saudis declared their intention to work with Russia to bring peace to Syria because unrest there would nurture extremism among the region's youth. Odd. I've always heard that Saudi Arabia intervened in Syria just to nurture extremism. The Wahhabi devils. Had the Saudi princes studied Kissinger? What does that mean to you?
Oh, okay, so he's referencing
I mean, I understand all of that, but I don't know what his exactly where what he is. He being like, is he being facetious, or what's he being? Yeah,
it it goes back to uh the
because
enemy
I
of
know Wahhabi. I mean, yeah, because Wahhabi was like, I mean, that was Al Qaeda and all them.
Wahhabi. The Wahhabi sect came out of Saudi Arabia because that's basically
Yeah,
Saudi Arabia's form of Sunni Islam.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, exactly. So,
like that's
I
a
mean, I'm just,
major sect there.
yeah, I mean, yeah. So, I mean, I just, is he saying? Because I mean, my thought is just because Syria and Saudi Arabia are working together doesn't mean, Saudi Arabia could have alternative motives or could
He
want
was
to disrupt, cause unrest.
Proyect saying that Saudi Arabia was accused of basically sending extremists into Syria, right?
Yeah,
Like I mean they do that. They probably I'm sure they
yeah,
did it in Syria. They did it in like every country. like,
yeah,
like
yeah.
in the whole Middle East. So they,
Well, yeah. I mean, 9/11. I mean, yeah,
they, like Wahhabism itself is a very like fundamentalist Islam, right? And so,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
and so it's and so it kind of breeds this extremism. And so, so what he's saying is, look, they declared on this last month, so March 2021, that they're going to work with Russia in regards to Syria, because Russia's basically, is really the granddaddy of Syria right now. It's not Assad.
yeah,
It's like, they're the big
yeah,
imperialist power that's controlling Syria. Saudi Arabia said they're going to work with Russia, and then Proyect is saying, and then they said they're gonna work with Russia because they don't want extremism in Syria with a youth.
Yeah.
And then Proyect, tongue in cheek, says, "Hey, I thought that they were the ones that were bringing all the extremism to Syria because that's right." And so he's saying, have they studied Kissinger? Like, that's a reference to realpolitik.
Yeah. Okay. So he's basically saying what I'm saying is that they can be friends. And okay. All right. I just think, I just wasn't sure of his tone there, but yeah. Okay. So So later on, he goes down and he's like, one other thing, he goes over the important like neoliberal reforms that Syria went through and stuff like that. I would have liked to see, and this is another problem that is a little bit inconsistent if we're going to talk about narratives like this, is that in his other article that we study, he puts in notes and sources. And here,
right,
I think it's important that there needs to be sources, links to these sources and stuff that he doesn't always do. And I think that needs to be a little more consistent, especially when pulling, and I will, pulling details and pulling statistics out of here, because I had to Google some of these, and I ended up thinking that, I ended up saying, well, I think he's a little bit wrong on this. And this is also, where he's a little bit unclear. Which I don't know if I agree with. He says down below, Google this, given the analysis of the Assadist left. So it says, one wonders how anybody could have possibly expected Syria to go the way of Iraq. And I quite frankly, I think that's ridiculous. Not ridiculous to say, but there's good reason that it was, it could have went the way of Iraq. And then it says, especially since the country was not particularly endowed with oil and gas. Well, it's 30th in the world. Not that it's like, Saudi Arabia or anything, but there were also two other pipelines that were heavily involved,
right,
in the from the U.S. perspective and from the Russian perspective, that were, that were important, routes from other countries to go through there. So, this was a big, section that a lot of the Assadists were saying too. But I think he's wrong to just totally discount that. And he also says up here, that, down below, he says, the U.S. has limited its support of the rebels to communications equipment, logistics, intelligence. But then, up there, he's not clear about, he says the bulk of billions spent in Syria were not allocated to weapons that could tiered Assad's air force. But, if he's going to bring these kind of, this is obviously, geopolitical part of it. There are like two articles, like New York Times talks about behind the sudden death of a 1 billion secret CIA war in Syria. Reuters also talks about how the FSA met in Washington to try and resume a suspended CIA program of military aid, about support for the war. So I don't know. I think saying stuff like this part needs to be clarified and talked about more, because these are huge talking points for people who support Assad too.
Yeah, but I agree.
So just playing the devil's advocate.
From what I've read, I think Proyect's right. Yeah, maybe he needs to cite his sources a little better, but basically the rebels were starved. They didn't have the weapons needed to fight Assad.
Sure.
Like there's been
for the
multiple statements I know I've read from different factions, and pretty much all of them say the same thing, that they can't get any weapons from the United States, and so and they had the manpower, they just didn't have the weapons. And
well, anti-aircraft. I mean, they were still.
And that was
they were still.
That was a big drive into basically branding themselves as Islamist fundamentalists, so that way they'd be able to get weapons from the other fundamentalist groups in the region.
But it says that it does say that there were, and that was like in the articles, it says that there were, and that was the big hold up in Congress, is that there was findings that they were being, a lot of these weapons were being funneled into Islamist groups. So that's why a lot of them were opposed to restarting it or whatever. I'm not saying, I mean, I think he needs to be more clear about actual proper weapons to fight Assad's bombers, which were huge. I mean, that, guns aren't going to do anything.
Well, he does say that. He mentions
you don't have
the man-pads never went.
I know that, but down below he says, the U.S. has limited support to the rebels to blah 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 blah. But that's not true. It didn't. It not just communications, logistics, and intelligence. It talks about actual guns and weaponry in these New York Times articles and Reuters. So all I'm saying is, I'm not disagreeing with like his overall statement. I'm just saying that there could be a little bit more clarity, because that's what the other side's arguing. They're saying, well, yeah, the CIA has supported it. And then they go back. I mean, this is the big talking point here, because, there's long history of this, that the U.S. has done this. And this is why it needs to be explicitly clear and not muddied. Like, I agree now with eventually what Proyect
saying. But it's not just the U.S.
Oh, I know that. I'm just saying, like, but the whole thing is, every country may do that, but that is the point, is why there is an attack on it, because the U.S. imperialism has reigned hugely for so long.
Right.
So I'm not saying that every country doesn't do that, but I'm saying, like, the overthrows, Iran and everything that they talk about, this is why, and then the intelligence doesn't come out for a long time. And, when the first Iraq and Iraq war in 91, when they invaded, when Saddam invaded, whatchamacallit, and they were allowed to retreat, all over the news. And I remember this, there was like, they said, Saddam, not defending Saddam, but there were dead babies being pulled, or babies pulling from ventilators, and it was all over the news, and there was support for that and stuff. I'm just saying that there is this stuff that comes out, and there is a reason for it, and that needs to be addressed along with this. Is if we're not going to address, problems, the initial base problems of why people think about this and how to effectively do research, then I think it's going to continue. That's all I'm saying. I mean, whatever it is now, like whatever the situation is now, like the overwhelming destruction that Assad and crimes he's committed now are well documented. But we at least need to address, if we're going to talk about anti-Capism, the history behind it and how it's led to this kind of thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to address, like, that basically there's a lot of disinformation out there.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying, right? And that
that's just what's led to this. And then, it's if we want to make a connection with them, and then not just say, okay, well, we understand this is how this has led to this.
We're not going to make a connection with Ben Norton and...
No. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, giving our other viewers that are less, because there's a lot that's not talked about and not involved, and I will get to that in the Nation article that I think is more of a liberal,
Right.
perspective, and I'll address that later. But do you
Well,
have
the
anything?
Nation is a liberal magazine, so
Yeah. Well, yeah, I
I
know,
mean,
that. I was
it's a
like,
very
yeah,
liberal magazine. Like,
yeah. I was like, no, I understand that, but
um,
yeah, and then I'll point out why after. But you gotta. Do you want to move on to the Ben Norton?
yeah. Let's continue. So Ben Norton is one of the co-founders of the Gray Zone. He's basically it's basically him and Max Blumenthal, right?
Yeah.
Are basically I think are still the heads of the Gray Zone, and so this is Twitter, which is, you know, this, I shouldn't have to explain what Twitter is anymore because everybody knows this is like where you
Yeah.
get the news before it becomes news, and so this is Ben Norton's Twitter, and he basically says that the U.S. regime change network has kicked into high gear targeting Myanmar. And Silicon Valley social media corporations are functionally an arm of the US government, pushing regime change propaganda on its behalf. This is yet another battle in Washington's new Cold War on China. And here he is, he's talking about the Milk Tea Alliance, the Solidarity Alliance. So this is what he's saying is the Silicon Valley media corporations. And so this is basically these are basically, I mean, this is a group in the Myanmar protests, right?
Yeah.
And so this is basically the opening salvo from Ben Norton into what we've been covering in Myanmar,
Yeah.
with the
And
junta and the protesters, and we predicted that, like, the protesters were going to get demonized
yeah.
as basically, being U.S. supporters.
Yeah, and I mean, this is what I call tabloid journalism, and this is why, because even like going back to Louis Proyect's article, all of his statistics, I googled them, were actual cited studies that that were cited, and that's what needs to differentiate behind this garbage, because
Right.
there's nothing here. There's no facts, no nothing. It's just a story that they think is happening without any evidence.
But this is an extension from Syria.
Yeah, it is. And yeah, I don't know if you noticed, but they're like TZM, the Venus Project, RBE replied to Ben Norton. The U.S. empire is evil, but so is Myanmar's military capitalist dictatorship, which is murdering their own people that want to be free from their sweatshop labor
I
camps.
missed it. Is it on this one here?
Yeah, it's on that thread. So I like that status. Here, hold on. I'll send it to you.
Anyway,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a lot of posts. There's multiple. I just want to say there's multiple posts of Ben Norton basically denouncing the protests as, being a color revolution. The NED, and like Andrew, like you and me, we've basically covered this since we started the show.
Yeah.
Like Ben Norton and Max Blumenthal in particular, but this whole like denouncing of protests and uprisings, it's a pattern, it's an ongoing pattern. It's been going on since the Arab Spring, basically. I mean, you could argue it's gone on before that, like, but it really took off, I think, during the Arab Spring, and maybe a little bit before that with the invasion of Iraq, when people when there was a section of the left that was apologizing for Saddam Hussein.
Yeah.
Which I remember, but back then it was like such a fringe element of the left that nobody paid it any attention. Like it didn't need to be addressed. But I think now it's definitely no longer like that fringe crackpot section. Like back then, like it was totally not the thing you wanted to do, protesting the invasion of Iraq, to be like, yeah, but I support Saddam Hussein. He's an anti-imperialist. You know?
Yeah.
But if like Saddam were around today, like I could totally see Ben Norton defending him.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
I'll save
As an
my comments for
anti-imperialist.
Iraq on the Nation article, but yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't got much more to say about these guys. I mean, do you?
The reason we're seeing this is because people like Proyect and others in the Marxist community have seen this. I know, like Frank Arango with Communist Voice brought this to my attention and tagged me in this. And so they're seeing this, and I think there's an understanding that a large section of the left in general, and also the Marxist community, is going to see this, and they're going to pick it up. You know, they're going to pick up where Ben Norton is leaving off, and when Ben Norton and Max Blumenthal were critical of the Arab Spring, when they first began to be critical, I remember that was also kind of, laughed at, right? Like it wasn't popular. But that idea grew, and with Libya and Syria, they kept on hammering that point. And so they began to build their support. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's an issue. I think Ben Norton and Blumenthal, they're going to run the rounds on things like Russia Today and Sputnik, and and I guess they're on the Chinese TV networks now, like state TV. And so they're going to run the rounds, Telesur, what's another one? Maybe Redfin, and push this.
Yeah. All right. So, yeah, we definitely need to be combating this growing ideology,
trend,
which
yeah.
ties into like our next two articles, kind of like talking about this campist movement, which dates back to the Cold War and support for, the USSR that's, against American imperialism. So we've got this article from, it was written by a Canadian activist, John Clark.
Right.
So I don't know. I actually didn't. I was going to go back and check who he is. But I mean, overall, I like this article on how it was written and how it was structured.
Yeah, this was shared on the what is it, the
Marxist mailing blog?
email list or whatever.
Yeah,
that Proyect runs, and so it was shared there. And I don't remember if John Clark actually shared it there or not.
Yeah.
I mean, he may have. I wasn't really paying close attention.
Yeah.
But it was this article gained some interest and some discussion, and I think this article and the next article have in common is they're bringing back the phrase campism.
Yeah.
To describe this growing trend.
That is just not that we're talking about, like the gray zone, that is just anything anti-imperial or anything anti-American as opposed to anti-imperialist.
Right.
They're not talking about things, in a proper context. And so this kind of goes on the history of it, and also starts to talk about China, and I really like this because I haven't seen this, and I brought this up for discussion too. And it links, and this is what I like about this. It talks about not only the growing billionaires, but it links to how much control and how many of them are a part of the Chinese Communist Party, which is extremely important now because this is exactly what Marx described as part of the capitalist mode of production, and the bourgeois is gaining control or having that control over the political power,
Right.
that now that there's concrete integration with them now, which makes it even more, I mean, one could forgive almost, having a tight controlled, political group in one sense, but now that it's been infiltrated by this, by capitalist money and stuff, I mean,
Well,
that's definitely
I think that
a-
John Clark hits the nail on the head, like, because
yeah.
he's saying, like, the campus trend comes from, like, the Cold War, right?
yeah,
The basically the anti-imperialist camp, the Soviet Union camp, those who basically were in, supported every country that had to do with the Soviet Union, or were in some kind of alliance with the Soviet Union. Gaddafi was one, right? Like,
yeah,
like another one would be China, like, Vietnam, etc. And
yeah,
so like this new form of campism, it isn't centered around the Soviet Union. There is no more Soviet Union,
yeah.
but it's centered around China. And I think that that John Clark hits it on the head there. Like, that's why he's honing in on China, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's this
He does
idea
it-
that China is a socialist country, and
Yeah.
that that what it's doing is socialism. It's some kind of transition into communism. That they have the capitalists under their thumb. That they got them under control, which is bullshit, right?
Yeah.
So,
I honestly, this is the best article so far in like, for the length of it and describing exactly, concretely as it's, in a understandable small read that, people can understand, and brings out the most important points. And he also hyperlinks to all of these other articles and statistics, which I like. And if you're not going to cite things, or like do hyperlinks, I think there should always be links down below. Contrary to what Ben thinks, it just clarifies things for everybody. People can look where you're getting your information from and stuff. I mean, as opposed to
it's good practice to try to cite
it
your
is,
sources.
and I like this. It's well argued, and then they go down to like,
Now,
three. Okay, sorry, go on.
what do you think about terming that trend campism? Like, because we've talked about this trend for a while, like for like 2 years now, and
Yeah.
like
I've been
it's
calling
a
it
trend
neo.
without a name. Like, like the
I'm calling it neo-campists. Neo-campists.
campus.
That's what I described. Yeah, neo-campism. I described in my show summary.
Yeah, because like I think it is important that the trend has a name.
Yeah.
Whether they give it a name or not. Like, I know that most, like, I mean, not all, but like most of those who have seemed to call themselves Marxist Leninists have kind of fallen into campism, but there's Trotskyist groups that have fallen into campism as well, right? And so yeah, like, so like I don't have a problem with campism. I mean, I think it's fairly concrete, but it is important to have a name to describe this trend, so that we can talk about it more concretely. So we can say, so that when we're talking about the campus trend, everybody and the community understands what we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
And so yeah, I mean, I think it's important. It's important to build that kind of like common vocabulary.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're watching the show like after, like if you're in the chat, I mean, let us know in the comments what you think about that term, or put it in down on the Reddit, and we'll take a look.
Yeah. So, any other thoughts before we jump onto this Nation article?
No, I thought this was a pretty good article, pretty solid.
I do too. I think let's post it in the up on Reddit after too.
Sure.
I think it's well written, well sourced. This next one, as I said, it's obviously liberal, and I think the way they've set this up geopolitically, I think, yeah, I mean, they do a lot of kind of whitewashing in their overall, they miss a lot of things. If the theory of why there's support from these different sides, especially with what they bring up here too. Like, I mean, for
Gilbert Achar.
Example, it talks about, and we've talked about this, it says, and although they were not waged by states that were described as imperialist, Vietnam's invasion of Cambodia in 1978 and China's attack on Vietnam in 1979 brought widespread disorientation to the ranks of global anti-imperialist left. Now, do you think, I don't know if this is unclear, but do you think those two belong in the same category? Because Vietnam didn't exactly invade Cambodia.
Yeah, it did.
Cambodia. What?
Yes, it did.
Well, no, I'm not saying in that context. I'm saying it wasn't imperialist aggression. Like Cambodia was constantly attacking.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, that's what I'm saying. It wasn't like, imperialist in that, oh, we're coming in to take over. Cambodia was going ape, was constantly attacking, and they were Vietnam, and they had they were committing horrible atrocities.
Yeah, but it's not saying they were imperialists, but because
it says although they were not, but
they were
then
not waged by states described as imperialist.
That then described as imperialist. So I don't know what that means in that context. But anyways,
I think China is kind of described as imperialist nowadays. But I think that did bring widespread disorientation to the anti-imperialist left.
Okay.
Noam Chomsky was a supporter of the Khmer Rouge.
So I mean, so was Ben at one point, right?
Yeah. The Khmer Rouge were supported by China. Vietnam was supported by the Soviet Union. So that's why. So when the Sino-Soviet split happened, that's basically when the Vietnam-China split happened. China became more oriented toward the United States, and Vietnam remained oriented toward the Soviet Union. When Vietnam invaded Cambodia, they invaded a Chinese ally, and then China retaliated by invading Vietnam.
So anyways, I mean, so then they go down and they talk about U.S.-led war against Saddam Hussein in Iraq and stuff, and then they say, my problem is here they just gloss over a lot of stuff. They talk about, that Saddam used chemical weapons, and then they talk about Iran. But they also, if they're going to talk about Iran here and that war, they also need to talk about that, for a long time, the whole world and Saddam, or the whole world, blamed Iran for those attacks. The Kurds said it was, Iran that gassed the Kurds. That was all over the news. And I mean, until, it came out years later and stuff like that. That's part of what I'm playing, saying, it also, many people didn't know that, the US supported Saddam for a long time, supported his invasion of Iran. And, and then it
says that basically, that Saddam massacred the Kurds with Western complicity. They're implying that the United States
Western complicity. Well, yeah, I know, but they also didn't. But my point is that there's, part of where this Capism is understanding it is, that is a lot of the propaganda that they're saying that wasn't true, is like that the U.S. blamed Iran, or for example, a lot of the support for the Iran-Iraq war was that counselor or that in Kuwait that's lied, that was connected to the U.S. embassy or somehow told stories about dead babies being ripped out of their incubators and stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't think that's what created Capism.
I'm not saying that created Capism solely, but lots of things added to it, like lots of lies, like Operation Gladio, Operation Mockingbird, a lot of stuff. This is what I'm saying, is that the argument on that side is that there's been a huge amount of lies and propaganda that we don't know for a long time, that only comes clear later, about these atrocities that so-called happened, that didn't happen, that the other side, one side was blamed for, but it was the other side that did it. All I'm saying is that's where the logic comes from. I mean, and it's not just one or two things. It's that whole thing that's built up that mentality. I know, because this is, I see these guys talking about and say, well, there's a history of this and this and this and this. And if we're going to get beyond that, then we need to be able to, have reliable.
A lot of that stuff has become very increasingly hard to get away with. Like, because of the internet, because we have these things everywhere. Everywhere there's one of these things.
Oh, well, not exactly.
Pretty much.
Some. Okay, so the WikiLeaks cable where the U.S. shot down a whole bunch of civilians. I mean, that wasn't captured at all. I mean, there are lots of things that do get unnoticed. I'm saying, yes, there is. I'm not denying that technology has improved our transparency and stuff. I'm just saying that it's not, this is where it lies, and it's growing, and it eventually will, this kind of technology, will help, but it still doesn't, I mean, there is the technological aspect, but there is still like the massive, like, propaganda effort too, that, eventually, I would like to hope, and that's the whole reason behind Ben's project, is for this transparent, social media project or whatever. So, I mean, I agree. I mean, the technology is improving.
There's always going to be disinformation.
Obviously, yeah, I know, but I'm just saying that there is a huge, like lopsided, stories, that have been manufactured, that have been proven by,
it goes both ways, though.
It goes both ways. I don't think it go. I mean, I don't think.
Absolutely. Look at Russia, right? Like when the rebels in Donbass shot down that airplane, and they said that they tried to blame it on the Ukrainians.
Okay.
It wasn't?
Yeah. No.
If you look at
Iran,
I'm
saying I'm not talking about recently. I'm talking about the long history that's led up to this. Of course, that's what I'm agreeing with right now, is that, yeah, I mean, Russia has came out as a strong imperialist force, but we know for a long time, what U.S. and Britain and European allies did for a long time, and it wasn't always lopsided. It wasn't going both ways. I mean, Iran doesn't have 50 U.S. or bases surrounding it.
Yeah, but
America does it.
But Mao chose to censor all the information about the famine, the Great Chinese Famine, which, I mean, we could argue about the amount of people that got killed, but millions of people died.
I know that. I'm not saying I didn't say that. I'm talking like it's not if we're talking about geopolitical influence and propaganda surrounding that, that's different from I mean I'm not talking about the internal information you know about how many people died in this in a famine.
The thing about campism is they're gonna believe whatever they want to believe because they've chosen to support a gang of countries. Yeah,
I
it's
don't.
just like it's like
I don't.
I
But
used
I
to
don't.
be
I can't agree with. I can't agree with. They're going to believe whatever they want. What I can believe is that
it's like patriotism.
I think. But this is them fine. Then we just ignore them. You said we have to fight them. Well, how do we fight them? We've got to get the information right. I don't think they're just unreachable. I think a lot of them, maybe not a lot of them, but eventually, if we get enough, ideas can change.
The the way
I've known people
the way
that have
to
changed.
fight campism is to fight it politically, fight the politics of basically expressing your solidarity with a group of countries.
And with proper information.
That are basically the only thing they have in common is that the United States doesn't like them.
Yeah, and we need proper information and statistics too.
Yeah, but that goes without saying for everything. Of course, we always need proper information and statistics.
All without saying for everything, because
yeah, it does.
Not doing this. People are not, even in our community, are not putting out are not sourcing it right, and not putting just writing stuff. And I mean that just.
Yeah, but you could source the right information to many campists. They will blatantly ignore it. That's not the issue.
I'm not denying that. I'm some of them. Yeah, you can't put a number on that either. I'm just saying. Hopefully, you said the only way we can fight it. I'm saying I think there are more ways to that's not the only way to fight. Is beyond expressing solidarity too. It's about politically. It's also a couple other factors too. But you said there that's guilt goes without saying, but it's obviously not covering some of the Marxist community that we've covered over the last year. That they also don't support their conclusions and stuff. But I agree it's a problem, and
one of the big issues, Andrew, that you're going to run into with the campists is you're going to cite your sources, and they're going to retort, these are all Western-backed sources. How can we believe them? They're not coming from China or Iran or Russia.
Some, but I've came up with some that are in China and stuff. But I mean, I'm not saying that we have to, argue with them in that. I'm saying when we post stuff, when we have to be more consistent, because some of the same writers write the same kind of article, but sometimes they post their sources, sometimes they don't. I just think that's one of the important things, and you already agreed with it, is that I think there needs to be a little bit more of more consistency in our writing and in that way. But I mean that's kind of like a technical issue.
I mean, I read this Nation article. I tried to read it pretty carefully. I couldn't really see where the lie was. Like,
what do you mean?
I mean, I'm happy to talk about the technicals of it. I mean, it seemed pretty solid as far as describing things.
I didn't say there was a lie in here.
Yeah. So
I'm just saying it's very liberal in that they don't they don't really go into some more important details that I thought were important involving what they were talking about. And I already mentioned that, but that's fine. Let's yeah, we're almost at one. Let's move on to theory and state of movement.
I mean, I think some of the more liberal things was that there seems to be some naivete and gullibility to how far the United States is willing to go in some of these situations. And basically there is like it mentions that Washington, that's the United States, for those listening, kept a low profile in the Syrian war. It doesn't mention how maybe the United States wanted Assad to stay in power. You know, like, because if the United States didn't want Assad to stay in power, it has the best man-portable weapons in the world. Like, basically, it has the very best anti-aircraft, anti-tank weapons on the planet, you know? And it's like, it doesn't need to send troops. It could train whoever's down on the ground. That's what it's done this in multiple different countries. And so that was my big argument, like in, you know, during Syria, is like, if the United States really wanted to get rid of Assad, he would be gone. It's not hard, you know? It's like the United States has the best spy network on the planet.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so next, let's talk about DSA. So we're talking about DSA.
Basically talk about what's wrong with capitalism,
and there's a Daily Show thing here. I don't know if we have time to like show any of it, but basically, this is Proyect's article. He mentions how the DSA it has like basically a board of directors at the very top of the DSA, right? And there's like 19 people on that board of directors. And this makes sense because like every nonprofit has to have a board of directors. It's the law. It's like DSA is a legal organization, and so it's no different. And so there's 19 people at this board at the tippy top of the DSA.
Tippy top?
At the tippy top. And
that's pretty top.
And 6 of those 19 are in Jacobin magazine, are in the Bread and Roses caucus, which is basically Jacobin magazine.
Yeah.
And so that's almost a third.
Yeah.
Now, is this surprising to me? Not really. I've always said that Jacobin magazine's like the official paper for the DSA, or the unofficial paper.
So yeah, that's what Proyect's saying here too, and he obviously has a problem with from some of their articles here.
Yeah, like Jacobin magazine is basically like it's not even Kotskiite. Like, it's, you know, it's a step to the right of Kotskiite. It's more like, yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I kind of think that Proyect's correct in calling it what does he call it? He calls it like a more like the Labor Party, and basically that they've taken the, like, Jacobin magazine has taken this position, and it's partly Trotskyist, but they've basically taken this position that that they can create a party, right? And the whole purpose of the party is to push the liberals over a tad, you know, to move them over a little bit. And that was the basis for the Labor Party, and that's what basically Proyect is saying. So it's the same idea behind the Labor Party, and this is why, like, the Labor Party never goes anywhere either, right? like even though there is a Labor Party now, he's saying, look, if the DSA wants to be the next Labor Party, it's not going to go anywhere. It's going to be just like the Labor Party.
Just like the Labor Party. I don't even think it'll be as successful as the Labor Party, too.
Right.
I mean, I think, there's a better chance, even how small it is in Britain, for it to break than one forming within the Democratic Party of the U.S. I think that's even more of a fantasy, even though both of them are.
Well, yeah, I think that, like, the only reason we really cover all this is because people in the Marxist community keep talking about it. But, like, I'm pretty sure that Proyect's been up to his eyeballs in DSA horseshit for years now.
Yeah, you can see it's starting to boil over. His red vein popping out as he's typing this out. Forehead vein.
Right. And that's saying a lot, because I mean, I don't really hold Proyect in high regard as a revolutionary Marxist myself. I mean, he's kind of a reformist himself, but yeah, like, for him to be this frustrated with the DSA, I mean, I think it's good that he's speaking out against them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's so.
Yeah.
I mean,
so
what do you say about that?
So yeah, and then we've got another article here in Counterpunch by Proyect, also called "The Short History of the Uighur Resistance," which I really thoroughly appreciated, because I knew it's been going on for a long time, but I really didn't know, like, the whole history behind it.
Right.
Like, I've heard of it, but I hadn't heard this in a long time, and I forgot about all the, like, how independent it once was.
Yeah, it's good to be reminded about these kinds of things, and and a lot of this history has been basically swept under the rug, because it doesn't serve China's interests, and then for two, it doesn't serve Western interests. So why talk about it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And so, yeah, it's good to kind of take a look at this. Yeah, I'm really glad that he included this this quote by Lenin on Ukraine. A lot of people don't know this, but, like, Lenin was very supportive of Ukraine's right to break off and become its own country, because basically Ukraine is a colony of Russia, so is Siberia.
Yeah.
And so he wrote, like, what Ireland was for England, Ukraine has become for Russia, exploited in the extreme, getting nothing in return. Thus, the interests of the world proletariat in general and the Russian proletariat in particular require that Ukraine regains its state independence, since only this will permit the development of the cultural level that the proletariat needs. Unfortunately, some of our comrades have become imperial Russian patriots. We Muscovites are enslaved not only because we allow ourselves to be oppressed, but because our passivity allows others to be oppressed, which is not in our interests. So, like, for one, that quote can be said of, like, present day Ukraine, because the campists are, of course, opposed to present day Ukraine on that basis. And then, but it also applies to, like, Xinjiang, and where the Uyghurs are at, and I would say, like, Inner Mongolia as well. And basically, like, Lenin takes a very strong anti-campist line here. Like, he's like this is a very, like, anti, we're not gonna support, like, Russian, imperialism. Like, he's not saying German or England. At the time, the biggest imperialist powers was Germany and England and the United States.
Yeah.
And France.
Yeah.
So yeah, no. So I thought it's good that he included that, and there's some good history here.
I think we should post this one on our Reddit page too, because I think there is some good history here.
Yeah, and there's a lot of there's a lot of pushback from the campists. We'll just say the campists that basically that the Uyghurs are these fundamentalist Muslims, that they have nothing to do with communism, they have nothing to do with Marxism. They're just like this backwards ethnic group, right? Of just like Afghanis, right? And so this dispels that, because they basically had a close association with the Soviet Union. So did Inner Mongolia. Like, they were occupied by the Soviet Union. So anyway, I thought it's good. So I think that's all I have. Do you have anything?
No, I think it's good. Yeah, I mean, I wanted to cover something else this show, but we'll put it on next week. But
okay.
It was just because we talked about it. There's like what's her name? I can't remember her name. Is Mexi? She's been doing this positive leftist news each week.
Okay.
And I thought that'd be interesting, maybe, but next week. But this one was a full show, and we had we already had a couple topics. But it was good. I mean, there's a couple good articles that I liked today that I, learned some stuff on. So that's always good, even though I do learn something new every show, which is also good. Yeah. But thanks for joining us, and make sure you subscribe to our subreddit, which the link is it's not down below. Okay, let's post it.
The link is down below.
Is it?
Yeah, it is.
Okay. Well, I'm an idiot. All right. Well, the link's down below. Yeah, and make sure you check us out next week, as always, same time, same place.